Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Hello, everyone. This is Morteza Rezazadeh from Hikmat International Institute, and I'm very happy to have you all with us. And I also want to give my special thanks to our dear speakers and presenters that we are going to benefit from in this meeting. Okay, let's start. Before we start, the plan is to start with Rabbi Ruth Sohn, that will be the first presenter of this important topic of women in our scriptures. I will give a very short introduction to Rabbi Sohn. Rabbi Sohn is a teacher, a writer, a graduate of Yale University. She received rabbinic ordination from the Hebrew Union College, Jewish 82. Sohn teaches and directs a monitoring program for rabbinical students at the Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles and teaches adults in both local and national venues. She is the author of some wonderful books, and she is very active in interfaith and in teaching Judaism and other fields of this field of religious studies. I appreciate Ruth, and we are ready to have your presentation. Thank you very much, Rabbi Ruth Sohn.
Thank you so much, Morteza, and my gratitude also to Hikmat International for sponsoring this program. There can't be too many opportunities for us to come together as people committed to different religious traditions, seeking to learn from and better understand each other. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity. So, as you acknowledge in your program description, one of the features, we're all going to be talking about women in our scriptures, and we have overlapping and at the same time different holy scriptures. So I just want to say a word about Hebrew scriptures, about what is holy scriptures for Jews, and that is that we have the Hebrew Bible, Hebrew scripture, what Jews call the Tanakh, and the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, that is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are really we refer to as the Torah, and that is on the highest level of Holy Scripture. And as I'll be talking about, our lived tradition of study and Jewish life really values ongoing the creation of a vast literature, literary and legal, based on, but continuing over the generations, which is true of all our traditions. So as you acknowledge in the program description, one of the features of our Holy Scriptures, and that's for all 3 religious traditions, is that they all come out of and reflect the assumptions of patriarchal societies. So there are, in some ways, limited ancillary secondary roles for women, we would expect and we find, and at the same time, there are many surprises in women, in female characters, and I think we're going to be talking about both today. A word about the literature of Hebrew scripture in general. From in the Torah and moving forward, but I'm going to really be concentrating on the Torah, our ancestors, even those we look to for the greatest inspiration, our heroes and heroines, are always presented as very, very human. That is, with weaknesses and flaws, and making and doing things that are troubling to us, weaknesses and flaws as well as strengths. And I think it's fair to say that it's often the failings, the weaknesses, the problematic actions which are front and center. They're so human. That is part of what helps us identify with them. And I believe part of the power of the Torah and the Bible as literature over generations, over millennia, we identify with them. It also forces us to engage, to not just sit back and read it passively, but the truth is we're really troubled at times by what characters, male and female, and frankly, even God, how they all behave in the Torah and in the Bible. And it forces us to really wrestle with the text and ask questions. Why? Why is God doing this? Why did God test Abraham with the command to take his son and offer him as a sacrifice? The text says after these things, God tested Abraham. What were those things? I'm going to be talking mostly about women, but these kinds of questions really are with regard to everyone, again, including God. And again, it really is what compels our engagement and our wrestling with the text. This is, I think, a very important feature of our literature and very core to the Jewish spirituality of Torah study and Jewish tradition and culture, this engaging with the text in this way, and the freedom of recognizing the problems and asking really tough questions. And we will see this in the examples that I bring today. So as I said, the Torah reflects the reality of patriarchal tradition, and we do see in some ways limited roles for the characters, even our matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel. We see reference to the covenant between God and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We don't, in the Torah, we don't have the women included, although they are clearly part of the covenant. And in each generation, we have some critically important actions taken by the women. They play pivotal roles, the matriarchs and other characters in the Torah and Bible. We even have 2 books of Hebrew scripture named for the women because they are so central to the narrative, Ruth and Esther. I want to say a little bit about Rebecca, the second of our matriarchs. So we have Abraham and Sarah, and then Isaac and Rebecca. And Rebecca, when she is pregnant after a long time of a long period of trying to become pregnant, she has conceived. She has the Torah says she has a lot of pain in pregnancy, and she's really disturbed by that. And she seeks out God. She seeks out an explanation from God. Why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? And she receives prophecy, direct prophecy. The text says that Adonai, God spoke to her directly and told her that there were twins inside her struggling, and that they would be ultimately 2 nations, and that ultimately the older would actually serve the younger, which is a flip of what is the norm. We don't have any record of this prophecy being given to Isaac, only Rebecca, and we don't have any direct reference to it, but we do see that she, at a later point, but we do see that she favors Jacob, the younger of the twins, and Isaac favors the older one. And when it comes time for the passing on of the covenantal blessing, which is done by Isaac, not Rebecca, Rebecca finds herself in a dilemma because Isaac is going to give the blessing to Esau, but she's had this prophecy that it really should go to Isaac. I'm sorry, it really should go to Jacob, or at least, it really, that this is, you could say, God's intention. So what does she do? She doesn't have the power to give the blessing. She doesn't have probably the kind of relationships we often have, we see as ideal between partners, husband and wife today. So we have problematic behavior from our vantage point. That is, she convinces Jacob to let her help him deceive his father, her husband, and disguise himself as Esau so that he will get the blessing, which is what happens. and what ensues is great pain, suffering, frankly, for Jacob and Esau and the whole family. We have no mention after this of Rebekah and her son Jacob ever seeing each other again after when he leaves. He flees for his life because his brother is intent really on killing him. And a lot of struggle ensues. So the question is treated differently by commentators in Midrash through the ages. Why is what she did justified? And I think it shows the limited options in some ways of women in a patriarchal society, the difficult choices and problematic behavior that some see as justified and others don't. But at any rate, she clearly plays a pivotal role in the narrative, determined partly the problematics of it, determined because of her limited role as a woman, her limited power, no power to give the blessing directly. I could really point to many examples. I want to turn actually to the beginning of the book of Exodus. As Jews all over the world every year read through the entire first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, and Jews everywhere are reading the same portion week to week. And last week, and this past Shabbat, Saturday, we read the beginning of the book of Exodus, when Jacob's sons and families settle in Egypt. That's how it begins, settling in Egypt, or recounting that, and becoming very quickly over the first verses of chapter 1, what's recounted is they're ultimately becoming enslaved in Egypt. And to the point, and Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, feeling so threatened by the growing numbers of Hebrews as they're multiplying, that he issues a decree that all baby boys born to the Hebrews should be killed. And the midwives are identified, there are 2 midwives, they're identified by name, Shifra and Puah, and they actually defy Pharaoh and refuse to kill the baby boys. They let them live. And Pharaoh at some point confronts them and says, what's going on here? And they say, well, there's something we can do. The Hebrew women are so vigorous in their delivery, in their labor, we can't, it happens too fast. The babies are born before we get there. And so the midwives, in defying Pharaoh, play such, they're so inspiring as figures of standing up to power and risking their lives. There's question of whether the midwives are Hebrew women or Egyptian women. The language of the text is what I say ambiguous, intentionally ambiguous. That is, grammatically, either interpretation can be supported. I don't think we've given enough attention to the fact as Jews in the history of commentary. There are commentators who understand them to have been Egyptian women, but they're frankly the minority, and I think it's an incorrect reading of the text. I believe they were Egyptian. It makes so much more sense that they were Egyptian women defying Pharaoh, and just because they're described as God-fearing. And that's Egyptian women doing this would be more noteworthy and worthy of the reward that God grants them. The role of the midwives, but also the women persisting in having relations with their husband and going on having babies even in the face of this decree, and the role of women in standing up to Pharaoh. The mother and sister of Moses, when he's born, Moses' mother hiding him at first until she can't hide him anymore, and then putting him in a little basket and floating him down the river Nile, hoping that somebody will find him. Sister Miriam watching to see that somebody does that. And so noteworthy, who picks up baby Moses and takes him in? Pharaoh's daughter. Have we made enough of that? Pharaoh's daughter. Talk about women challenging authority, subversive acts of women to save the day, frankly. Women, the Egyptian midwives and Pharaoh's daughters, seeing beyond the divisions of the people, two different people, seeing the importance, the value of life and our connection as human beings, regardless of what nationality, what people, what tradition. How powerful is that? How powerful is that? I just find it so enormously, just so inspiring. So it's really my pleasure to share those examples. May we all be inspired, and maybe they be lifted up to us as women and men and all genders and people of different faiths and traditions. This is Martin Luther King Day, being very celebrated and observed in the United States, and I think it's really fitting in light of his legacy and memory to recall and lift up the actions of human beings, and in this case, women, speaking truth to power, standing up to power, finding ways more quietly to defy the dictates of rulers and the constraints of oppressive rule. May they inspire us all. Miriam, I'll say just another word about Miriam, who is only mentioned 4 times in the Torah, but is very much an inspiring figure to many, including me. I've long been inspired by Miriam. I want to give an example of how rabbinic tradition in the Midrash actually picks up on dynamics going on in the Torah text and amplifies them. So we have a lot of different Midrashim about Miriam. One about her as a little girl at this very time of Pharaoh's decree. The Midrash says that Miriam's father, Amram, who was the head of the Jewish community, of the Israelite community, was in such despair because all the baby boys were going to be killed that he stopped having relations with his wife. And because he was the head of the community, all the other men did the same. Miriam confronted him, a little girl, like maybe 5 years old, and said, Abba, your decree is an example, is worse than Pharaoh. You're worse than Pharaoh. Pharaoh, his decree affects only the baby boys. Your decree, stopping having relations with your wife, prevents the birth of baby boys and girls. And further, Pharaoh is an evil man. It's not clear who's going to listen to him, but you're a good and righteous man, and everybody's following you. And according to the Midrash, her father listened and went back to his wife, and the other men did the same. So this is a very early rabbinic interpretation, filling in some of the gaps of the text and amplifying, picking up on and amplifying the extraordinary role of women that is explicit in the text, but we don't have so many, it's a very spare narrative. The rabbis also say that the Israelites were saved, were taken out of slavery because of the actions of the righteous women of that generation. That's in the Talmud. So women have powerful, pivotal, determining roles even within a patriarchal context and many restrictions. And I think I'm going to leave it at that for now. The question of through history and the role, how the status of women in Jewish societies, I think, I'm hoping we can talk about this more later, but I would just like to say that often, yes, earlier texts are referenced, the authority of the Torah can be referenced, but it's often what we see really is attitudes of the time, what is going on in the wider society influencing how the texts are read, and how slowly or quickly things change. And the fact that Jews have lived all over the world in very different societies, and looking at the role of Jewish women in even traditional Jewish contexts is really quite different in different times and places, reflecting different attitudes surrounding the culture and coming in, being brought in different ways. We are very fortunate to live at a time of tremendous change in the wider society in some parts of the world, and that definitely has come into Jewish life. Even in the Orthodox world, the more traditional part of our community, and even, every part has a spectrum, and the Orthodox world too. So modern Orthodox Jews even today have women serving as rabbis, being trained and serving as rabbis, something I never thought to see in my lifetime. The first, even, in my circle, in the more liberal context, it's 50 years, 50, that women have been ordained as rabbis. It's not so long. There have been instances earlier, but very rare. So maybe I don't want to take too much time. Just say that we live in a very exciting time of greater equality and greater opportunities for women to add our voices and our experience to really be lifted up and count in different ways, and to contribute to scholarship, to culture, and Jewish life, and in just so many rich ways. And I'm so grateful to be living at this time with all its challenges. Thank you.
Rabbi Son, thank you very much for your awesome presentation. I really appreciate you, and I enjoyed it. I really especially enjoyed the great examples that you brought from the women, who are really inspiring, not only for women, but also for everyone in the world, not only for people who are living now, but also for people who have been living throughout the history. That was great, and I really appreciate you. Thank you very much. And now we want to go directly to the second presentation with our beloved Dr. Heidi Hatzel, whom I have the privilege and honor to be a student for many years now, and I have always been learning a lot from her. And she kindly accepted to be presenting in this meeting. Dr. Heidi Hatzel was the president of Hartwell Seminary until April 20. Degree from University of California, Berkeley, a master's degree from Union Theological Seminary at Columbia University, and a PhD from the University of Southern California. She also did postdoctoral work at the École, if I'm right, École, and Sciences Sociales in Paris. She's been a long-time activist in interfaith activities and learning ethics, and she's a professor of ethics, and we have the privilege to be at her service tonight. Thank you very much, Dr. Heidi Hatzel, and we are at your service.
Thank you, Morteza, for all the wonderful work you do, and for bringing us all together for
thank you.
What's a very important and ongoing conversation. My task is to talk about women in Christian scripture. As many of you will know, that the Christian Bible is composed of the Hebrew Bible and also the New Testament, and I'm going to focus on the New Testament. And I'll just dive right in. The New Testament, written in Greek, really has two major parts to it. It's 27 smallish books. The earliest parts are the Gospels, and they're written between 15 to maybe 120 years after the death of Jesus. The Gospels focus on the life and teachings of Jesus and the death of Jesus. And they're written by those who follow him, some of them describing accounts from original witnesses. The second major part of the New Testament are called epistles, and that's where we find, and they're written maybe 100 years later, to Christian communities, and their focus is often, like in the work of the Apostle Paul, on the life of the early communities, early Christian communities of the followers of Jesus, the quality of their life together, practical problems, organizational problems, and so forth. So from the Gospels, first I'll talk about both of these. From the Gospels, it's very clear that women were present as early followers of Jesus. They were members of the new communities that were forming around Jesus from the beginning, although, as Ruth pointed out, in a context of a patriarchal culture, right? The Gospels consistently show that Jesus himself welcomes women and took them seriously as believers and trusted them with tasks in the group of followers as he wandered around Galilee, preaching and healing and feeding the hungry, chastising the rich, and so forth. So, for example, the Gospel of Mark, Mark 16, verse 9, is one example of this. And I quote, "There were also women," describing these bands of followers of Jesus. "There were also women from a distance, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James. They used to follow him and provided for him when we were in Galilee. And there were many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem." Or Luke 7:47. "Soon afterward, we went on through cities and villages, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. There were 12 with him, who were the disciples, they were men, as well as some women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities. For example, Mary and Joanna and Susanna and many others who provided for them out of their resources." So it seems clear that in the early followers of Jesus, women were present in perhaps a bigger way than they had found in the wider society, and intent on being full participants in this group of followers of Jesus. Also in the Gospels, individual women are often depicted as the most faithful and also the most humble followers of Jesus. And they were also depicted as people who had direct interactions with Jesus, who was apparently happy to interact not just with women, but with women on the margins. That is, women marginal to their own society, widows and prostitutes, and people who had been forced to the margins in a variety of ways. And it seems possible that, and maybe even probable, that some of these women were attracted to Jesus's message and to Jesus's movement because it opened new possibilities of escaping some of the restrictions and some of the beliefs about women that were prevalent in the society that they were subject to, particularly as marginal people, particularly as marginal women. And that would be the same, of course, as men, attracted to Jesus because their own roles in their society weren't fully recognized or satisfactory. So that's the early depiction of the early female followers of Jesus as they weren't disciples. They weren't allowed to be disciples. I don't know if they wanted to be disciples. They weren't disciples. They were there. They were followers. A number of them were healed, as the stories tell us, by Jesus. and present with him in his movement. So then here we come to Paul about 100 years later, and Paul is not describing the early movement of Jesus, the early Jesus movement, but he's intent on building and spreading the church as an institution. And in Paul, the tone about women changes from the Gospels. And his focus is on their proper institutional role in what is becoming an institutionalized church, how and where they will fit in this new church institution. And you'll hear the change of tone here. It's Ephesians 5:22. And this is Paul. Wives, be subject to your husbands as you are to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, just as Christ is the head of the church. Just as the church is subject to Christ, so also wives ought to be in everything to their husbands. Now, Paul, and there are a number of citations of Paul telling women, essentially, this is your place and stay in your place. And if you do so, then you can be part of this forming church, these new churches. He does soften that a bit sometimes. He tells husbands that they too should love their wives. Not just wives love their husbands. And he addresses communities when he writes letters to the Ephesians and other communities. He often addresses them to brothers and sisters, to the brothers and sisters of Thessalonica, for example. One wonders in this change of tone of Paul, if he is reacting to the women in the church because they had found a place there that Paul thought was improper, right? They had found a way to be in this early Jesus movement, and Paul is trying to, if you will, put the genie back in the bottle. Put women back in their place, and or put their women, if not back in their place, put women in their proper place in this new church. So what we see in broad strokes, what we see in the New Testament is some ambivalence, a lot of ambivalence about the role of women in this new movement. Is the role of women more like Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, as we heard in the first quotation, being part of this Jesus movement and strong supporters of it and followers of Jesus, or is the role, as the church gets more institutionalized, are women asked or forced to or counseled to assume institutional roles, maybe less liberating to women than the early Jesus movement. So early Christianity has this ambivalence, and I would say today, like the early followers of Jesus, women are often the backbone of the church around the world. And one could hardly imagine there being a church without women in it. And yet this ambivalence plays out today in many different types of Christianity, and in different types of Christianity, it plays out differently. So, for example, as Ruth said, rabbis have been women, or women have been rabbis for 50 years. About that, maybe a little less in the case of Protestant women. And many Protestant denominations, women have been allowed to become pastors, to be ordained as pastors, and to be leaders of churches. Still in the evangelical movement, one sees women being asked to be women as Paul would have asked them to be. Subject to their husbands, and in a hierarchy of the of women and men in church and so forth. Although in other types of evangelism, evangelicalism, there are women, active women leaders and so forth. And Catholicism has a role for women as nuns, but not for priests. So I would say the ambivalence that we see in the early church continues today. And that's what I'll say.
Dr. Hatchell, thank you so much for your brilliant scholarly presentation. Thank you very much. And I really appreciate it. I hope that everyone has also enjoyed it like I did. And we'll be at your service at the end of the presentation if you have time to stay with us for questions and answers that may happen after this. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to the third presentation with Dr. Haniye Tarkian, who is with us tonight. Dr. Haniye Tarkian is an Islamic lecturer and a geopolitical analyst. She received a master's degree in international relations and strategic studies from Pegaso University. Did I pronounce it correctly, Dr. Tarkian? Pegaso?
Yeah, Pegaso.
Yeah, Pegaso, Italy, and a PhD from Jamiat al-Zahra in Qom, Iran. She is a writer of Studio Comparativo sulla Figura. This is Italian, but it's a comparative study on Lady Mary. So we are happy to have her with us in this meeting. And we are at the service. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, Dr. Tarkian.
Okay, in the name of God, the Beneficent and the Merciful, I would like to thank those who have organized this conference, as well as the speakers and the attendees. And it's a pleasure for me to be here. I just apologize for my Italian accent. I just hope my speech, you can understand my speech. So I think that when we wanted to discuss the religious perspective about any kind of issue, we should first make some points clear. So the main point, which I will start to clarify, is because I think it's very important to understand the issue. So the main point is about God being the main source of our knowledge and the one who can lead us to felicity through his teachings, and mainly the scriptures, actually. Therefore, God is the only one who deserves to be obeyed completely. You know that all Abrahamic faiths hold the oneness of God. So, of course, he's the only creator and the only true object of worship. And the outcome of this conception of God is that the universe is coherent, is harmonious. And the harmony that exists in the divine creation shows itself in his revelations as well. And therefore, the divine messages which are conveyed to people through his messengers are coherent with each other, are harmonious. And because they're actually revealed by God himself to human beings, which possess the same nature and the same basic needs. And this is to show them the way to perfection, the way to felicity. And so the revelations are identical in their essence, even if, of course, there are some details which may change. And the Quran, the holy book for us Muslims, places great emphasis on the message of different prophets being actually the same message. The main message is the same for any prophet, and also their prophetic missions is very similar. So they convened the same message to people. And this is very beautiful, because you think that you belong to one large community of faith, the same community. And also the Quran invites the believers, all the believers, not just Muslims, to join forces and to focus on what they have in common. So the Quran says, "O people of the book, come to a common word between us and you, that we will worship no one but God, that we will not ascribe any partner to him, and that some of us will not take some others as lords besides God." So there is this exhortation to reject the authority of those who like they think they are God, and they wanted to manage our lives without any legitimacy to do so. And for example, like Pharaoh, he felt like he was God. He could manage the lives of people, and he thought he could do everything he wants with the lives of the people. And this is a key point. And I think it is our duty to discover the pharaohs of our age, of our time, and to oppose their oppression and their claim to manage our lives in the name of actually their own interests, not our interests as a human being. So, and this is a message which was carried by all the messengers of God, a message which consisted in recognizing that God, being the one who created us, is the only one able to guide us in the management of our lives, and to show us what benefits and what harm us. And we have seen, unfortunately, how throughout the history of humanity, many have tried to impose themselves on others, to dictate laws without actually having any kind of legitimacy, and also without having the knowledge of what the dimensions and aspects of the human being are. And also actually they were the first not to follow their own laws. So they would actually themselves had established. And at this point, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that in addition to what we can call a kind of manipulation, or I would say usurpation of what we can define as the legislative lordship of God, there is also an attempt to manipulate the ontological and existential lordship of God. And now I have to explain these two concepts, the legislative lordship and the ontological lordship, because maybe some of you are not familiar with Islamic theology. So we need to understand, and then I will, of course, I will connect this issue with the main issue of women in Islam. And so according to Islamic theology, of course, God is the creator. He is the cause that bestows existence to everything. And this means that contingent entities not only depend on him in their coming into existence, but also to continue to exist, they need God. So they are completely dependent on him. And so this kind of divine lordship in Islamic theology can be divided in two types: the existential or ontological lordship, which means that God, being the cause which, as I said, bestows existence, he knows how to manage the universe and how to ensure that life and existence continue. So all the creatures are able to satisfy all their existential needs, thanks to God. And the Quran says, our Lord is he who gave everything its creation and then guided it. So this is the first type of God's lordship. The second type is the legislative lordship. What does it mean? It means that since the universe is managed by God, and he is the cause who knows and satisfies all the existential needs of contingent entities, he alone has the ability to guide the creatures towards felicity. And so he's the only one who has the right to legislate rules, and these rules are aimed to help people, to help the creatures to reach felicity, or himself, or either himself or other which have his permission. And because he's the only one, God is the only one who knows what truly benefits us and what harm us. And so which is the main difference between the existential lordship and the legislative lordship? The main difference is that in the first case, which is the existential lordship, the contingent entities, that is the creatures, cannot disobey the order of the universe established by God. While in the second case, they can choose, the creatures can choose to disregard the rules established by God. Or at least this is what was thought up to now. Because now we can see an attempt to manipulate even the existential and the ontological lordship of God. What I mean? I mean that, and now I want to link to the main issue, the issue of women and their role in society, because the issue of women and their role in society is an example of a kind of usurpation and manipulation of the ontological lordship of God. Because we must admit that many of the things that have been done up to now to give dignity and rights to women have sometimes turned out to be dangerous, because this has led to a lot of confusion, and the concept, for example, of masculine and feminine, as well as the awareness of what the faculties and potential of men and women are, these have been lost, because men and women are different, and this, this big word different, every time it is pronounced, it almost seems that the other person is being offended somehow, when instead we notice that in God's creation, all the things differ from one another, and this is just one of the expressions of the beauty of God, of the beauty of his creation. God is perfect, and his creation is perfect. The differences between men and women are precisely an expression of this beauty, of the beauty of creation, and the fact that they are, men and women are complementary is one of God's greatest gifts. But Unfortunately, the first movements that attempted to grant women rights and dignity actually had the most, I would say, that the most paradoxical of goals, because actually they asked the women to become like men. That is, that becoming a man actually became a goal for women, as she wasn't already something, something precious, something, a precious being herself, as if what she already did and the role she held in society didn't matter. Of course, I don't want you to misunderstand me. Certainly, the way people considered women in the past had to be revised, had to be changed. Certainly, there was the need to obtain more rights for women, but this goal cannot be achieved by making a woman behave like a man. Rather, I consider it a kind of actually offense for a woman. Nowadays, many people think that the true fulfillment of, for example, for a woman is lies in making a career, when in reality it is not even the true fulfillment of man. For example, the emancipation of women in a given country, if you look at the news, analysis and these kind of things, you can see that it is judged on the basis, for example, of the number of female workers, the number of female representatives they have in parliament. And of course, let me be clear, I have nothing, of course, against these, but it is the kind of evaluation that they are offering that I wanted to emphasize, because I don't think it's a correct way of evaluating the role of women in society. And we can consider it a kind of attempt to manipulate God's ontological lordship, because the society nowadays is asking the woman to be what she is not. And unfortunately, this doesn't end here, because now we can clearly observe that the woman is asked to no longer be a woman, the man not to longer be a man. And for example, those characteristics that are typically masculine, such as virility, and typically feminine characteristics such as emotionality and femininity are actually rejected as negative. And this is not a good thing, because as I said, there are differences between men and women, and this is one of the most beautiful expressions of the manifestation of divine magnificence. God has exalted each one of them with specific qualities and characteristics, which are reflections of the divine attributes. So the way they can come to their fulfillment, the man and the woman, from a human point of view, may different. Not because a man is worth more than a woman, or the woman is worth more than a man. Because being a man or a woman, of course, is not in itself a value. But if we want women to reach their true fulfillment from a human point of view, we needed to help them understand what their potential is as a human being, but above all, what their unique potential as a woman is. And we can say that many groups that claim to defend women's rights actually fight for the right of women to make themselves like men. But this kind of, it means distorting the role of women, because women should aim to be themselves, to be respected as such, and to fight so that both on a social and individual level, they have above all the possibility of fulfilling their own nature without, this implying giving up social commitments. The accomplished woman does not feel the need to, for example, imitate men or to compete with men, and she never feels impaired when treated only as a woman. So what us as believers have in common is that we can seek guidance to develop the potential of men and women in a divine guidance, because God is our creator. He's the one who truly knows us. He's the only one able to guide us towards what benefits us towards felicity. And unfortunately, human beings, because they have limited knowledge and limited experience, they have failed to establish a worthy role for women. And nowadays, the role models that are offered to, for example, to the young women growing up in today's societies are mainly based on the on the material dimension. And but we know that we also have a spiritual dimension, so we also need guidance to know how to manage our lives, both from a material point of view and a spiritual point of view. And so the religion, the role models offered by religions can help us because they take into consideration both the material and the spiritual dimensions of life. And also a religious model I think can also be elaborated through interreligious dialogue, because we have many personalities in our religious traditions which can help us to build a kind of religious role model. For example, we have the wife of Pharaoh who saved Moses. We have Mary, the mother of Jesus. We have Fatima, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad. For example, the Quran mentions in particular the wife of Pharaoh as a role models, not just for women, for all human beings. So the Quran says, God says an example of the faithful, the wife of Pharaoh, when she said, "My Lord, build me a home near you in paradise and deliver me from Pharaoh and his conduct, and deliver me from the wrongdoing lot." So the wife of Pharaoh is introduced as a role model for all the believers. And the religious model which we can build out of religious teachings includes the spiritual aspects, of course, includes the importance of chastity and modesty, that unfortunately nowadays is something which is not considered anymore. And the religious model underlines the importance of the family, and also the religious model does not prevent women from being involved in society and in participating in public life. And finally, it is necessary to stress the important role that religion can play in saving modern society, because a society must be a place that helps the material and spiritual fulfillment of the human being, and not a place which hinders it. And every creature must be able to fulfill his or her potential, which could be different from one person to another. In the Islamic vision, society must be managed in such a way as to allow women to have the right to play their role as, for example, as mothers, but without neglecting their social role. And on the contrary, the active presence of women in society is emphasized in Islam, precisely because they have some peculiarities, women. So
Dr. sorry for the interruption. I'm really sorry, but we are running a little bit out of time. So if you can conclude.
Okay, just the last sentence.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the interruption.
It's okay. And so the society can benefit from the presence of women, but provided that women behave according to their being women and not with false identity. The esteem that a woman has of herself, being a woman with specific potentialities, can lead her to influence the society in which she lives and elevate society from a materialistic and also from a spiritual point of view. Thank you. Sorry, it got a bit long.
Thank you very much, Dr. Takyan, for your presentation. I really appreciate your time and your wonderful presentation. And also, I wanted to appreciate everyone for kindly being with us. So let me say something. We have run out of time. Do you want to have questions and answers, or we can just finish? I'm kidding. We can. I think our presenters are kind enough, and we will give you some time to have 4 questions and answers, right? So if anyone has something to ask, or they want to share anything or their thoughts, please feel free to unmute yourself and start talking. And you can say your questions goes to which of our presenters. I would ask everyone, all the questions to be short and very directly related to the topic that we talked about tonight, because we don't have much time left. Thank you. Yes, LJA, that's what I have here. Please feel free to ask your question, and then we will be then we can have Miss Fatima Najjarzadeh going to ask her question. Yeah, Dr. Abid, that's Dr. Abid. Please go ahead and ask your question. Just don't forget to unmute yourself. Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for this presentation. All 3 of them were really interesting and inspiring. I would have a question to Dr. Haniye Tarkian. I would appreciate if she could elaborate more on the role of women, as she called it, but there was little time to describe this in more detail, as she sees the role of women and also the opportunities for fulfillment of women, as she called it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Tarkian, do you want to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So because I had I'm not sure I understood the question. There was sound. Well, the from
do you want the
Islamic
question to be repeated?
Yes, I mean. Excuse me to
How
interrupt.
can women reach the perfection, actually? I think this is the question, right?
Not perfection. It's very difficult for human beings to reach perfection, although we all strive to, but fulfillment, as you called it. And to make the question short, is there a specified role for women? You mentioned their role in society and roles in family, but is there a specific role that is intended for women in Islam? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, what I mean by perfection, of course, it's very difficult to reach, but from an Islamic point of view, the aim of of creation, the aim of God creating human beings is to reach their fulfillment, and this is actually the proximity to God. So the main aim of both men and women is to act in a way in their lives, in their individual and both individual and social life, so that they can reach what is called the proximity to God. And in this way, they can also have some kind of felicity and a quite good life in here in this world, and also in the hereafter. So the women, as I said, because men and women are different, so if they can understand which are their potentialities, for example, women in particular are very good in educating. I will make an example. Of course, there are many other fields in which women are good, but one of these fields is education. So women can have a very good role in educating, not just their own children, of course, if they have, because they are not it's not that they have to get married and have children, but if they have a very big role in educating their children. And so in society as well, men can have a bigger, I would say, role in educating people. Of course, men as well have this kind of role. So I'm not saying that, because as I said, they have different characteristics. So each of them, men and women, can have a role based on the characteristics they have. One of these characteristics in women, for example, is educating, is even making the society, because one of the big role that a woman can have in the family is to give peace and harmony in the family, to establish peace and harmony. So because women usually they are very good in diplomatic, they are very good in being diplomatic in trying to, for example, if the children they argue with each other, the mother is usually better in trying to make the two children not arguing anymore. So of course we have to analyze this, and I think also this can be a very good subject to understand more about the characteristics of women and men, and understand how they can apply these in social life. I don't know if I could answer with your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tarkian. Dr. Hatzel and Rabbi Sohn, if you also want to add anything to the questions, please feel free to do that. Or if you want to add anything, I mean, with regard to the other presentations that were offered, please feel free to add anything.
Well, with one thing that occurs to me in response to what you just said, Professor Tarkian, is what about individual men and women who have individually, they have different strengths than what we consider the general, what we associate in a particular culture. And my understanding is it really varies to some extent, culture to culture, society to society, what traits are associated with each. But let's say you have a woman who is who wants to be an engineer, who has skills to be an engineer, or a man who wants to be a nurse, or within a family, the father is much better perhaps at what you just mentioned, being able to help the children get along. Would there be, what does it mean then to allow people to reach their God-given potential given who they are as individuals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yes, please, Heidi, go. Yes.
Now, I guess what I would want to say is, I'm a Protestant. I'm from the Reformed Calvinist tradition, and our tradition regards religious institutions as human institutions, and therefore they're fallible. They can make mistakes and they can change over time, so that my perspective just differs from that of Hania in that sense. That just the whole nature of religious institutions is and societal institutions. Therefore, we can make mistakes, and maybe one of the mistakes historically, as I look back at our histories, our religious institutions in Christianity haven't been sufficiently cognizant of the skills and the faith and the contribution that women can make. And if that's the case, then we ought to change that. And in my tradition, we're able to do that if we can agree with each other, because the institution itself is human. So it's a very different kind of perspective.
Exactly. And in my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Tarkian, in my understanding, a large part of that perspective goes to this part of the Islamic mysticism. So when it goes to the Islamic mysticism, we can really take that approach. But when we want to talk more about what we really need in our today's modern society and the role of women, some other approaches can easily be taken into account. Thank you, Doctor. I think Miss Najjarzadeghan. You had your hand raised, but it disappeared. Yes, Najjarzadeghan, please go ahead and have your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you a lot, and thanks our professors. I'm so happy to participate in this conference. I have some questions about their topic. My dissertation about the Islamic feminism and the evaluation of them, and especially by some new ideas about the verses of the Quran about women. I want to know what's the idea of both Professor Ruth Thorne and Heidi Hatzel about the Christian feminism and Jewish feminism. Are you agree with these ideas, with these different branches of them, and what kind of working you advise me to know and to study more about them. And another question about the Mrs. Tarkian, if I said her name correctly. I want to know that these differences between women and men according to the Islamic perspective. What's the citation and what's the verses or what's the tradition we can cite to them and imply to them until we prove that these differences between women and men, because our discussion is based on the Islam, and I want to know more about this. What's our citation about that? Thank you.
Yes,
These are big
Rabbi Son, yes, would you please start? Yeah, please go ahead. Rabbi? Can you hear me?
Yeah, these are three really big questions. I don't know how you.
Sure. Yeah, and we need to be very short because we have already run out of time. So yeah, let's have a very maybe general answer, and we can discuss it later more. Or yeah.
All right, I will say on feminism, on Jewish feminism, I see parallel to my understanding of feminism more broadly. We're talking about different stages in the development. On one level, first level is, I would say, not so much equality as in being the same, no, but equal access to opportunities within society, equal access to education opportunities, first and foremost, and then to opportunities within society, in culture, in the making of culture, in institutions of government, different career paths, things like that. Equal access. And many people thought that was like the beginning and the end. But that is really the first step. The next stage is, as women enter these all these different spheres of society and culture making and participation in making culture, it's an open question. What does it mean to include more fully women's voices and experiences? Time will tell. Will it be the same? Will it be different? How? The individual, the collective, time will tell. So that is really, really important. Do women teach in all the different spheres of life? Do we do it differently? I think there may be some general differences, but there often are. What's more salient is more critical is individual differences. So it's a mystery. I also see the spectrum of what we call masculine and feminine within every person. We all fall somewhere on that spectrum, and groups of people may be more on one side than the other, but not absolutely everybody. There's more I could say. How we read the opening narrative in Hebrew scripture of the creation of man and woman. I'll just say what's usually read and translated as God creating the woman out of the rib of man. That's not the only way to read the text. The word for rib, selah, also means side, and there are even Torahitic references where it's the side of a building structure. You could read it that God created a first androgynous human being, then divided into man and woman, male and female. That's the second account of creation, chapter 2. In the first account, it's God created human beings, male and female. God created them, and they're all created in the image of God. So even this also gets to what we bring to our tradition, again, from our individually and with the influence of the time and place in which we live. But that interpretation that sounds so modern goes back to early Midrash, and it's influenced by Hellenistic ideas of the time, the same time as early Christianity. So that's a textual exploration, but I think we're interested now in the contemporary more. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. So as Dr. Abid also confirmed, that what you said is very true and very important. It is the equal access to education and different spheres of human life. And I appreciate it. Dr. Hatzel, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just add that I think we all lose. Within our traditions and within our cultures, we all lose if all the voices aren't being heard and allowed to flourish. I think we have men have as much to learn from women as women do from men, for example. Or so I think, and I think there's a lot of theological backing for God wills the flourishing of all of us.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I understand that there was some other parts of the question, but these are hard topics and need hours just to start the discussion. And but what I always say, what cannot be achieved completely should not be missed completely. So we just started the game, and then we can continue later. The participants can be in touch with the professors if they want to. And this discussion, I hope this is a good conversation and discussion starter. And I really hope that we can have more opportunities like this in the future to talk about these types of important topics. As Ruth truly said, it's really important. We are living at a time that there are different blessings, that these, some types of these blessings didn't exist in the past. And of course, challenges. One of the greatest blessings that we took advantage tonight is the possibility of bringing people together from around the world and hold meetings like this without just having to travel all over the world. So that was what we decided to do in this meeting. And of course, making friendship and connecting people to each other is itself a great blessing of God. Now I think we are a community, and I hope that we can continue this relationship to learn from each other and to share knowledge with each other. Consistency is the key to success. So we want these Hikmat events to continue, and we really want to have at least one event each month and talk about different topics that are related to the real problems of our time. And provide as much as possible, as much as we can, provide some answers to the really hard questions that are commonly asked by people, especially by the youth. So this is how I wanted to conclude. And for those of you who may have cutoffs in the connection, please be informed that the meeting will be available on our YouTube channel. It will be uploaded soon, so you can access it later. Thank you everyone for your participation. Every single person's participation is the key element in organizing these types of events. And again, a special thanks to our dear presenters for their gracious and kind acceptance of our invitation and for kindly sharing their knowledge and wisdom with us. Thank you very much. I hope to see many of you in the next events, and so we are done, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mortaza.
Sure. Absolutely. It was a pleasure to see all of you and to spend time with you, even virtually. It's a great blessing and a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mortaza.
Thank
And
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Sure.